Welcome to the Ultimate Dental Podcast, the place where you can learn how to create a dental practice and a business life that you love. Listen in with Dr. David Moffet as he interviews successful entrepreneurs and successful business people and successful dentists as they share their business successes, their stories, and their breakthrough ideas. Sharing pearls of wisdom that you can take back to your practice and implement immediately so that you can have that great practice with more patients, higher profits, and less stress. This is the podcast where great dental practices meet with successful business processes. Thanks for tuning in to the Ultimate Dental Podcast, the podcast where thought leaders, industry experts, and thriving practice owners reveal their very best tips, tools, and strategies that will help you to grow your dental practice faster. Now, here's your host, Dr. David Moffet.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Ultimate Dental Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. David Moffet. I'm in Burrawang in New South Wales, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome to this podcast studio this afternoon in Melbourne, Dr. Harry Marget. Harry, welcome to the Ultimate Dental Podcast. Great to see you, and thank you for being a guest.
David, it's an incredible pleasure. Thank you so much for asking. It's to be considered a great pleasure and an honour to be in the same room as you, a major force in this industry, and I'm very honoured to be here.
Thank you, Harry. And Harry, the reason I invited you onto the podcast is that you've just recently retired from being a practice owner. You've sold your practice in the last few months, and you were involved in dentistry for 53 years, which is quite an achievement. And of that 53 years, apart from the first two, basically all in the one place in East Bentleigh in a suburb of southeastern Melbourne.
Correct. Yeah, no, I had the main practice was always there. I had another practice which I started in the city. That was a complete startup from nothing in the middle of Collins Street. Everybody said it would never work, and we've talked about that in the past, you and I. And then I had a third practice that I took over in Elwood for a lady whose husband was a dentist and he wasn't well. So I ran that for 3 or 4 years just to make sure she had an income. So mainly in East Bentleigh and the city of Melbourne and part-time in Elwood.
Wow. Now, Harry, just before we hit record, you were telling me about how you started off in East Bentleigh. Can you share that now for my viewers and listeners? Because that was a really interesting time.
It was. I had been working part-time for a couple of specialists in Collins Street. Essentially, I got to do all of their work they didn't want to do, broken teeth, broken fillings, etc. Anyway, I was offered a look in at a practice in East Bentleigh, and I went down to see the owner. He was an ex-army dentist. I walked in there, and I won't mention his name out of respect, but went in there and I said, "How much do you want for your practice?" And he said, $11,000, take it or leave it. I said, "Well, I don't have $11,000. He said, "Well, then get out of here. So I'm not interested in talking to you." I said, "Well, what if you don't sell it? What are you going to do?" He said, "Well, come Christmas Day," he said, "I'm going to walk down the stairs, lock the door, throw the keys in the gutter and go home." Oh, I said, "Well, in that case, I'll just be waiting outside in the gutter and I'll pick up the keys and get started." He said, "Oh, so you're a smart aleck, are you?" Right, the price just went up to $13,000. So I had to very quickly in the new year go and see my bank manager, who was an ex-army guy. And I told him my story about getting called up for the Vietnam War, and he was a bit considered about that, and he lent me the money. But he told me I had to pay it back within 6 months. 6 months? I said, "What if I don't succeed?" He said, "Not my problem." He said, "Well, come and grab whatever you own and sell it." That was the story, yeah.
Wow. Now, what sort of dentistry was this guy doing in his practice, Harry? What sort of a practice was it?
Very well. It was interesting, David. As you walked up the stairs, you could, well, I won't say what you could sense or smell. He used to do $1 amalgam fillings. Whatever amalgam filling you needed, it was $1. Then he used to do $3 extractions. Interestingly enough, his sterilization method was a little stainless steel basket with boiling water, which he didn't change. He just threw the instruments in there for a minute or 2 or 3 and then took them out, run them under cold water, did the next extraction. He used to do dentures for $30, I think, or $50, one or the other. And he did a lot of those. I mean, there was a huge amount of work being done. And he had the most interesting little laboratory I've ever seen. It was a tiny little lab, just off to one side of the surgery, and he still had there old gold casting equipment, that thing that used to whiz around. And I said, do you ever use that? He said, I did when I was younger. He said, not anymore. He said, can't be bothered with it anymore. Yeah, so that was the sort of surgery he did. So there's just the one chair and the one surgery and one receptionist, no dental nurse, and it's massive space building, a huge building, with just nothing in it upstairs. That's the sort of dentistry he did. And he was so busy, David. He was a member of the Catholic Church, and there were 2 monasteries near us. There's still 2 monasteries near where we were. And his policy was that if you were a member of the Catholic Church and you're a man of the cloth, you could come in and get all your dentistry done $0. So he used to treat a lot of the priests, for $0. So you can imagine when I started and these people would come in, I say, you need 2 restorations. They said, well, that's all right, you can do it. I said, well, that'll be $30. No, we don't pay. He said, the policy here is we don't pay. I said, oh. I said, well, that was the policy, but I said, I'm here now. He said, yeah, well, that's it. We don't pay. You got it? He said, we're all Catholics. And you're obviously not a Catholic. I said, well, not today. I'm not, no. He said, well, we don't pay. I said, well, how am I going to feed myself and my family? He said, the Lord will provide.
Well, what an
That's what I started with. So very quickly, David, 30% of the practice evaporated.
It's a tough way to start off, Harry. And I know when I started and purchased my practice in 1987. I think it was $80,000 then. And the first day I turned up, the one staff member said, oh, by the way, we don't have a sterilizer. We've just got this cabinet shines a purple light on things. And I thought,
no,
that's good for cleaning your combs, but not really good for doing your dental instruments with. And similarly for me, that chap then went to work at a practice near his home and took half his patients with him because they were family and friends from where he lived. And so I had a big chunk of my practice evaporate, and and it was
what it's
struggle.
like.
It was a struggle to do things. My lab was also where my compressor was where my sterilisation equipment was where my storage was for materials. It was a tiny little room. And it was right off the surgery. So every time the compressor went off, we got that noise in the surgery. Those were weird times.
Yeah.
You became with your practice, I know you became the owner of the building. So how did that come around? Because obviously this guy didn't sell you the building.
Yep. No. So when I moved in there and I started renting the place, my landlord was a lady called Mrs. Vicky Briglia. The Centre Road, East Bentleigh area was originally populated by Italian and Greek families. So they bought up a lot of the property in that area, including these commercial buildings. And just where the Moorabbin Hospital was, that was all market gardens. The whole area was market gardens, and the Italians and Greeks would run all that. So she was the owner of the building. And she was tough. If the roof leaked, she said, you fix it. I said, if there's a problem with one of the windows, you fix it. I said, but I'm the tenant. She said, did you hear me? I said, you fix it, right? So after a couple of years of me paying for all the repairs, etc., I spoke to her son who took over, John Brigler. I said, John, I really need this building fixed and repaired. He said, I can't go on like this. I said, every few weeks something else breaks or leaks, the roof leaks. So he said, oh, look. He said, to hell with that. He said, Mum's not in control anymore. I might just sell it. So I thought, oh, God, great. I'll have to buy it because I can't go on like this. But 2 things got in the way. One, I got nominated for the tennis team that was going to Israel for the Maccabean Games, and I was elected captain of the seniors tennis team. So guess what? When the auction for the building was on, it was right when I was away in Israel. So at the time, I said to my dad, could you go along to the auction and bid for the property? He said, sure. But at the same time, I was dating this girl who was a barrister who was kind of keen on taking control of things. And there was a clash at the auction. My dad bid a certain amount and she bid, without even looking at him, she put an extra 30 grand on it, David. $30,000 for nothing, right? And before I knew it, it was sold, knocked down to her, and I paid an extra 30 for nothing. But that's how I got to hold the building. That was about 9 to 10 years into the occupancy of that area. So finally got control of that building, and then I had to spend a lot of money getting it fixed.
Now, when I met you, Harry, in, I think, 2002, your practice was still upstairs and you had a pharmacy as a tenant downstairs. Now, that
That's right.
changed very soon after that, and you took over the whole building and ran a 2-story dental
I did.
practice. Tell me about the
I
growth
did.
to get to the
Uh-huh.
whole of the top floor, and then tell me about the decision to go ground floor and top floor all in one, because that would have required a lot of hubris to
Yep.
put those
I
body
like
parts
that.
on the line, take a risk.
So there were two things that are integral to that, and you've covered both of them already: risk and the hubris amount to take care of that. I made a decision that we were upstairs was really getting very busy, and the reason that was so successful is that we were doing a campaign at that time called Painless Dentistry or something like that. You know, we had a yellow page ad, which I think I showed you, of a man, me, actually with my fingers like this going, we cater for cowards. And so just using relative analgesia, the place had become unbelievably busy. But then I found that we were doing so many general anesthetics outside the building, up in the hills of Burwood, that we couldn't sustain it. So I thought, you know what, if I take over the bottom part of the building, we can build 4 surgeries down there, which we did. Everybody said, you're out of your mind, right? You don't have the work to back it up yet. You don't have the work to support it. But I'm a risk taker, so I thought, no, I think that this can work. We've just got to market it properly, and you being an expert in marketing, you know what that means. So I just decided, yep, bang, let's go for it. So the last 2 surgeries on the bottom floor were set up in such a way we could run it as a general anaesthetic centre on 1 or 2 days a week. So the surgery here, recovery there, surgery here, recovery there. And then, David, we just started marketing harder than ever before. Around about that time, I also bought the city practice, which was a nothing. There was no practice. It was just an empty building. But what we had was, in addition to the fact that we were Medibank private preferred providers, the building was owned and operated by a group called the Australian Postel Institute. And they had spoken to me about providing dental services for their membership. So this is all before the days of plans and projects, etc. And they had a thing there called the API Services Friendly Society. Now, friendly societies are very big down here in Victoria. I think there are some in New South Wales as well. But the beauty of that was, without having to pay any extra money, we had all these extra people that wanted to use our services, and they were being referred to us by the Postal Institute, and that made that go busy. And then the overflow of those patients came to East Bentleigh, would you believe, from the city, because around about the same time, I had negotiated a deal with a big health fund called Geelong Medical Hospital Benefits Association. They were located in Geelong, the failed football team that you may have heard about at AFL level. Anyway, they decided that they would come to the city if I provided them with space to run their insurance company. Well, it was a double bunger. Not only did they come in, but we were then able to move a lot of patients with no insurance into GMHPA. We then had a GMHPA listed practice in the city, which all the city workers just started to come to. So it just went nuts. You know, we had 1 chair, we went to 2 to 3, and we had 4 in like less than 12 to 18 months. It just went absolutely nuts work-wise, and it continued to be like that.
So were these calculated endeavours, Harry, or were these just things that you thought, well, let's give it a go? Did you have a forecast that it would work, or if it didn't work, it wasn't going to be too expensive, or was it just sounded like a good idea and let's take a punt and see what happens?
I think it was a bit of both, David. Actually, very good question. I think it was a little bit of both. I've always had this attitude that, back yourself or believe in yourself. It's worth taking a small risk, small return, big risk, big return. But initially, the idea to extend the building was, I thought it was a tiny bit of a risk, but I had the personnel, I had the work coming in the door, and I figured if I marketed this properly and set it up properly, I could make the upstairs and the downstairs absolutely busy. And that's what happened. We went from 4.5 dentists and 1 hygienist to 6, and then to 7 and 2 hygienists in virtually no time. And during that time, we had to go and build the downstairs surgery. The risk in the city was very, very minimal, because no matter what happened, API just kept sending patients. GMHBA was sending patients. There was no risk. And I said, you know what? Maybe I fluked it. I didn't fluke it. I like your question. I think it was a little bit of both, David, but I believed in it. And the thing is, if you really believe in something enough, as you know, because you've had the same successes in your career, if you really believe in something enough, You make it happen. Through simple positive outcomes, through simply believing it can happen, you make it happen, right? That's the key. Yeah. And I learned that from one of my other friends who's also dearly departed. I had a very dear friend, Martin Blakey, who was a professional gambler. And before you think, anything too much, he was a man who taught me, believe it or not, he showed me how to play roulette for profit, right? And before you think, roulette, throwing a ball, well, he wrote a book on it, and it was all about what's called chaos theory, throwing a coin in the air 50 times should come down 25. Well, it doesn't. He used to teach, he taught me about risk taking like nobody else, and I followed his lead. Yeah, so it was a bit of both, a bit of careful planning. I mean, I had to have a budget, I didn't have the resources, I had to borrow the money, but I was never shy to do that. I always thought it'd be easier for me to do something if I borrowed money from someone rather than use my own money and risk it. I mean, if it goes bad, it goes bad. But if you borrow money and it goes well, at both levels.
Interesting. So at the time when you expanded from upstairs to downstairs and you developed these relationships with the funds, that was a bit of a risk because the funds were seen as the enemy in dentistry. How did that go in
Yep,
terms
they
of,
were.
how did that go, one, in terms of working with the funds, and then two, turning up at dentist meetings and being finger pointed at?
More than fingers, David, much more than fingers. You remember this. Yeah, how did it go? I'll tell you, they had an ADA group meeting at the Hobbs Cafe in Sandringham, and it was the group meeting month to month, and I thought, oh yeah, I'll go along. I very rarely got anything out of these meetings. They were just generally people meandering down history, recovering history. And I went to this particular meeting, and as soon as I got there, I had fingers pointed, and I had someone say, oh, look, there he is. That's the prostitute of dentistry there. He's prostituted dentistry. He's ruined it. Don't serve him any red wine because he's ruining our businesses. So I was thinking of going home, but I walked into the bar, and the guy behind the bar, someone I knew from tennis, and he said, what do you want to drink? I said, give me the most expensive red wine you've got. So he said, okay. And he went and got a bottle of Queen Adelaide, I think, and poured that out, and I had a couple of drinks. And then these two dentists came in, they said, we don't really want you here. I said, well, too late. I said, I paid my membership. I paid my fee. I'm going to sit here. So they've got a table out, and they put me in the corner of the room by myself, David. So that was that. And I just sat there. I had something to drink. I had something to eat. And when the lecture had finished, I just got up and I left, So did it go well? No. Was it a tough gig? Yeah. I mean, you get ostracized by people like that. But, the joke was on them because working with the funds, as you remember, we used to talk about it a lot. The thing, you had this fixed audience that would show up, right? Now, not everything had to be done according to that. If somebody needed a crown or two or more, right, the fees were just then outside that. They became private fees, right? So whatever they got back for that crown from Medibank Private, we charged them the same fee, but they had to pay a bigger gap because the insurance only paid for one. So the joke was on everybody else. They all said, oh, well, it'll never work. Well, it worked, and it worked magnificently. Did it cause me a bit of angst? Yeah, it did. But you know what? You can be very, very unhappy driving Maserati down the main street of Rome, David, or you can be driving a Volkswagen and breaking down in the back streets of Camperdown. I know which one I'd prefer. So it worked.
Well, not only did it work, Harry, but you also had people who worked for you who then were able to duplicate your model and in other parts of Melbourne. And obviously, you can't be everywhere and chose not to be everywhere. That's it's very difficult to be everywhere at the same time. But it was obviously a system that worked, and people studied what they learned, whether you wanted them to or not, and decided to go out and copy that. So, it was obviously a process that you believed in, and you were able to make it succeed. Would that model still work today?
Easy answer, no, not as I set it up, right? The way I did it. The model that would work, we can get to that if you want to explore that, but that particular model was ripe then because all the factors that you've alluded to, the health funds, the growth, the replication, the duplication, all those things were new and hadn't been ramped up or dealt with, okay? So we were doing that, plus the fact that a lot of new technology came on board, including things like clear aligners and all this other sort of stuff, which was just money for jam. That was just another way of rebuilding the business from the inside out. So I think what would work today would be if there were people that had new tech that they could bring along. And there's stuff, some of the stuff I saw overseas just recently will blow you out of the water. I mean, there's people in Italy and Israel, etc., who have developed brand new techniques for managing perio. There's another guy that's developed some tests for testing saliva to see if you've got markers for various inflammatory diseases, chronic inflammation. There's a lot of stuff that could go on that would make a difference today. But I was lucky that the timing was such, everything in business is timing, but the insurance companies and the health funds were right around me at the time when I needed to make that magical growth. And I believed in the capacity to support that. And look, it was really strange. I would go and talk to them about, what we were doing. And I'd say, do we fit inside the bell curve? Sure. So long as you do things according to the rules. And that's what I couldn't understand, why people wouldn't see that working within the bell curve still allowed you to grow and develop incrementally, with all that going on. So I think there are methods. I mean, today, I think you and I talk about this all the time. What is going to be effective today? You need a new approach today, but it's the one that you and I basically believe in as our ethos. Satisfy the customer, make it a customer service experience. You've written books about it.
So interesting point, Harry, and we'll come back to the future because you've alluded to what will work. What worked then won't work today. But in the meantime, as I said, we met in 2002. That was about the time that you were going from upstairs to upstairs and downstairs, and you became a big entity. But then in 2007, corporatization or roll-ups came to dentistry. We'd seen it go into medical practices. I knew that it had to come to dentistry. I didn't know whether it was going to come in my lifetime, but I knew that my practice was at the top, and I couldn't sell my practice to another dentist because anybody who could do what I was doing could set up and do that beside me. So they weren't going to go and buy my practice. So I had to hope that the corporates were going to come along. And the first one that came along with a pretty good model and a pretty good paycheck, and I took it. Now, you decided not to go into that market at all. You resisted the corporates for a number of approaches. There was never any one that really fancied you, or did you fancied joining or selling to, or was it just that every offer that came along to you was missing something?
I think that's more accurate, David. There were a lot of people that approached us, or me, at the time. Most of the offers had things attached to them that I didn't like. You had to be responsible for a certain amount of production, you had to be responsible for a certain amount of rule making, and you had to do things according to a formula, always, And I had never stuck to formulas until that time. If I had stuck to formulas, I would never have done what I did, because it wouldn't have been acceptable. No, there were a few that came to see me that I almost went with. I mean, there was a group in Queensland, you know who that is, who appealed to me and offered me much, much more money than the group that we just sold to did. Well, not much more, but a little bit more, right? But the fact was that I then would have to readapt everything I did to their formula, plus the fact that I was no longer me, right? I couldn't be me. I couldn't be the marketer. They told me that if I did radio ads, which as I do, I'd have to do them according to their principles. If I did any marketing or advertising or any talking, it'd have to be done according to their rules. And I couldn't see it. I just couldn't see it. I mean, I'd never, ever, ever really ever worked for anybody else my whole life, except for the first 2 years when I was working for those Crown and Bridge specialists in Collins Street. And so working for somebody else and having to do their thing didn't really appeal to me at that time. Plus the fact that they weren't going to pay me. They were going to pay me, but I was going to get 60%, 70%, 10% now, 20% later. No. If I'm going to sell, pay up and I'm gone. That's it. So I resisted all that for those sorts of reasons. And I'm glad I did, because we then had another several years of magnificent growth in the whole group. I branched out into new areas. I decided to bring people in who could do more sophisticated procedures. And so we brought in specialist oral surgeons, we brought in specialist implant specialists, orthodontists. We brought all those people in, and the bottom line exploded, absolutely exploded. so that whatever those people had offered me then was now no longer relevant because we were now miles ahead of what we had done. And it was because we stuck it out and brought these people in. It wasn't easy, David, as you know. It's never easy bringing those people on board. But that's what made the difference, bringing all those people in and having them do their thing and me not do my thing. I just had to manage and market, etc. That was the big difference. And that's why I resisted until just now, because conditions have severely changed now, right? Severely changed.
So let's talk about the now and the fact that you have
Hmm.
recently sold, I think in end of June, early July this year. You're now an unemployed retired dentist working as a part-time beekeeper, part-time winemaker.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I met this girl who was a beekeeper when I was at university, and somebody said, you should go out with her. She's a keeper. But anyway, let's go back selling now. And so you were able to pioneer yourself a walk-in, walk-out approach, really, which is something that the corporates didn't
Yep.
like. They wanted you to,
No.
as you said, they wanted you to take part of the money, but still accept
Mm.
more risk while you built their business for them. And you resisted that.
Yeah,
How did you go? How did you
totally.
successfully negotiate a walk-in, walk-out? Like, this is yours. You're buying the
Good.
risk. You're
Good.
accepting the risk.
I'm glad you asked that. As I said, David, I had never worked for anybody else my whole life. It was either me. I either swung and failed, or I swung and succeeded based on everything that I did. It was all on my head and my risk. Okay, so when they came to see me, and I showed them the numbers, and I showed them that these numbers were based on I have the way I do things, bringing in people and things, I have a measured risk. So I knew that if I brought in dentist A and he did 2,000 implants for a year, I know what that sort of sum of money looked like. I know what the expenditure was, what the costs were, and what the profitability was. So I said to them that inbuilt or plugged in to what they were buying were these inbuilt schemes that were going to make them heaps and heaps of money, right? So I showed them that. I said, this is not how, I'm not running this as a regular dental practice. No. I said, this is being run like, for example, Coles or Woolies, where they'd have specialty meat departments or specialty pasta or specialty dairy foods. I said, these things are plugged in and are working extremely well. Plus the fact that we were actively recruiting these people overseas. So we were bringing people from Canada, South Africa, New Zealand, England, Wales, Ireland, etc., to do these specialty procedures over 2 and 3 year contracted periods. I don't think I ever told you about that. So the program was set up to succeed. I mean, these people had the ability and the skill set, and we did not have to train them, right? I mean, you and I both know how difficult it was in the early days training new grads, etc., to work in dental practice to succeed. So the process of the sale was based on the fact that I virtually guaranteed them that if they did things according to this methodology, they couldn't lose. I mean, there was no way they could lose any money. They're going to do extremely well. So the basis of that was, I said, look, if I sell, I said, I'm out, right? Totally out. It's on your head. Now, my business partner, she decided to stay there because she's a lot younger than me. So she just wanted to keep on working 4 days a week. And they said, that's fine. So the basis of the sale was, David, that if they wanted this business and they wanted it the way it's set up and running, then they can have it. But the money had to be paid upfront to the dollar. No deals, no clawbacks, no nothing. It's on your head. You want it. They said, we do, but we want to keep an interest in you for 1 year. So I don't know if I told you, they said to me, look, we want to keep you around for about a year. I said, oh yeah, and how do you want to do that? I said, well, look, why don't we offer you some dollars, just to be around if we need to ask you anything or, check on something or check on a system. And I sort of reluctantly agreed to that. And as it's turned out, it's been terrific because they never call me. I don't hear from them from one day to the next, So the way it was said, look, if you come in and you take it over, Gem walks and you run it. So that was the deal.
Yeah, it's obviously you negotiated a very good deal there. Your business partner, does she have an active role in running the business, or is it she's now just an employee. She's
no.
taken on an employee.
Basically, she's just doing the dentistry there. I think they have meetings, all these corporates seem to have meetings upon meetings upon meetings, and then emails are generated, and these emails seem to circulate through different layers of these businesses, and then they have another meeting, and there's no outcome. So I think they have these meetings and meetings. And I mean, they've offered both her and my business manager an incentive if they can maintain the numbers. Right? They've said, look, you get to keep this at the same numbers, we'll pay you, this much money. So I guess that's what they've done. But no, they decided to offer me. So basically, I've got a 1-year deal where I have to be available to help them with something. But what that help is, I have no idea.
So they haven't called you yet. So congratulations on negotiating that walk in, walk out, because even taking corporate takeovers out of the equation, you and I have both seen enough practice transitions where they've not gone to plan. I remember the best model I ever saw was 2 dentists working on the northern beaches of Sydney. One was the owner, one was the employee, and then one weekend they sold the practice from one to the other. And they turned up, and it was exactly the same relationship, and nobody knew any wiser. Patients didn't know any different. Staff didn't know any difference. Now that's a relationship made in heaven. But recently, I know of a practice near me where a long-term owner sold to a new dentist and meant to stay on for 2 years, lasted 2 months, and there's a story there behind that. So it can.
Well,
It's tough.
there's stories in. Sorry. Now, there are stories in Melbourne, David, countless stories like that, countless stories. Over here on the southeastern side of Melbourne, countless stories of things like that. In the northern suburbs, etc., northwestern suburbs and country towns, similar sort of stories going on like that. Well, look, historically, I don't know if you've ever read this, there's a couple of beautiful bits that have been written by how these corporate takeovers go in Europe and England and America, etc., and they all fail.
Well, I think the difficulty, and it was anticipated, with the corporate that bought my practice, and that was the first corporate to appear, was what was going to happen after 5 years that everybody had signed on for, and they then retired out of the business. How would the business maintain without the key man? And years down the track,
we
they're
know
still
what that
going,
looks
and
like.
some of those have hit rock bottom and are now rebounding off the bedrock, and thinking that that's a success. Yeah, we're down here when we were up here, but we're coming back, and that's a difficult.
No, that's you're absolutely right. Yeah.
But it's not just dentistry that happens in, Harry. There are businesses all over that, successful retail businesses that just one poor decision, one missed opportunity, and they failed.
Accountancy, medical, veterinary, all of those. The veterinary ones are one of the biggest collapses I've ever seen. There are books being written about that. Green. Oh, anyway, it doesn't matter. Yeah, a lot of that. Because the principle, when you take a David Moffet out of a business and you replace it with a nondescript person who doesn't have the experience, the gift of the gab, and the skill set, what do you expect? It's like taking Roger Federer, out of the tennis and replacing it with, I better not use his name, with somebody who's an amateur tennis player. You're not going to get the same results. It just follows, But then again, I guess we can't clone ourselves, David, can we? Maybe that's the idea.
Well, Harry, there is something in terms of, and you've shared a lot about this, having the right mindset and being that sort of person who looks at things and says, well, I can see the upside. I know there's a downside, but I'm willing to take the risk. And I think that, that was something that I did. I remember when I bought my practice, January 1987, and one of my friends came over to see me at my practice as he used to on his Friday afternoon off, and he said, I'm looking at buying an apartment. He said to me, you could probably afford to buy one too, because I was renting where I lived, and I had my car in for service at the other end of town. I had to walk from the car dealership to my practice, and I walked past 2 real estate agents, and I saw 2 apartments, and I thought, that's interesting. I got to work, and I had a couple of hours free in the afternoon, and so I said, I'm going to go and see these 2 apartments. They were at different agents. And I went and saw them, and the first one, was fine. The second one was excellent. It was northeast aspect, 2 floors from the top in a 9-story building, so it had a view. Didn't get the heat of the roof. Wasn't getting the westerly sun. And I thought, I'll take this. And it was October 1987, and it was just before the stock market crashed. And guess what happened when the stock market
Oh,
crashed? The real estate market went up. And my friend who told me about this, I thought I was scared to tell him that I'd actually gone and bought an apartment. He never bought. And he said, even if he'd have bought 4 or 5 months later, he still would have been ahead. But he said, I never bought. And so some people are risk
and
takers, some people not.
I think there's an aspect to that, David, which I want to highlight for you because I know you reasonably well. In your mindset and the way that you think, and I've seen this over the years that we've known each other, it's clear to me that when you manifest something strongly enough, for example, writing your book, right? Being good at your golf, being good at things that you like to do or that you admire. You're a person who, yes, you might be a risk taker, I'm pretty sure you are, but you also are a person who can manifest something and you manifest it strongly enough to make it happen. That's the key, David. If we could bottle that and teach that to people, it would be miraculous. It would be worth billions of dollars. But there are only a handful of people that have the belief, that don't see it as a risk, but see it as something that they dearly want to do or achieve, and they train themselves to manifestly believe that it's going to happen. Same thing happened to me when I bought the farm and I built the vineyard. Everybody said it'll never happen. Everybody said it'll never work. People told me East Bentleigh would never work. Then the city would never work. But I believed in it strongly enough that I said to myself, I believe it, I'm going to manifest it and make it happen. And one of the greatest writers I ever came across was a guy called Theodor Herzl, who wrote a book. At the front page says, if you believe it long enough, it will work. And that means manifestly believe it. And that's been your hallmark, David, through all the things that have been up against you and things you had to, overcome, including your health. You've just believed. You've strongly believed it, you've manifested it, and you've come through it. Key.
Well, I think what you've got to do, and it's what you did, and it's what I did, Harry, and that is that sure, there's every possibility that certain things can happen. But what you've got to look at is what are the core things that you have to do that then eliminate these risks.
Yeah.
Because there are core behaviours that we need to follow and do that eliminate things. Turning up for work on time before your patients. Being the first person there, or definitely there before your patient, and being the last person to leave. That's just part of owning a business.
Yeah, but you see, you get it, David. I get it. Lots of other people don't. Lots of other people don't. Belief is part of it. Trust is part of it. Risk-taking is part of it. And then I've just got to get it done is the last part. Did I ever tell you that I won first division in soccer pools Tats Lotto some years ago?
No.
Did I tell you? There was a time in my previous life when I was in a marital situation, and my brother-in-law came home one day and he said, "Oh, look at this." He said, "I've just won $6,666.66 because he'd put $1 on a Tats Lotto ticket for what was called Super 66. Now, I had never won anything in a lottery ever before, David. Never, not even 50 cents. So I decided that I didn't feel good about the fact that he had done that. I wanted to work out if I could do it. So everybody said, forget about it. Lotteries, no way. It's 1 in a million to chance. But there was a lottery around called soccer pools. Soccer pools was a thing based on the English Premier League soccer games. And the basis of the pool was you had to be able to select score draws. If you could pick the score draws, you win. Now, I didn't know a lot about English soccer, so what I did is I bought every English newspaper I could buy every week, cut out the sections with all the results in them, put graph paper up on the walls, and I graphed out the results of every single First Division Premier League team for weeks and weeks and weeks. Everybody said I was nuts. The person I used to live with also said, "You're mad, you're crazy, it'll never work." And one day I woke up, David, looked at this board, and I'd been marking the consecutives with a red pencil. And this line went like this. I thought, God, I said, those teams have got a high propensity of hitting score draws. And I really, really wanted to win this lottery. I really wanted to do something for myself to say that, all right, he did it, but I can do it too, right? So I went out and I bought myself a soccer pools ticket, David. It cost me $86. I didn't realize at the time that I had bought what was called a System 8 entry, which is a complex entry, and I'd bought it for 5 weeks. I ticked all the wrong boxes, so it cost a lot of money. When I came home, I said to someone, I said, I spent all this money on it. Waste of money. You'll never see a penny of it, right? David, the following Tuesday, I work in East Bentleigh, and I'm working on a former friend of mine. And the girls come in, they say, there's a fellow on the phone says he wants to talk to you. I said, what's his name? He said, Harry Beitzel. I said, Harry Beitzel? He was the umpire's advocate here in Victoria for the football umpires. Turned out to be a crook, stealing money from people who won soccer pools. So I go to the phone. Hello? Yeah, g'day there, it's Harry Beitzel here. How are you? I said, who is this? He said, it's Harry Beitzel. I just told you that. I said, now who is it really? Because I have these mad mates who used to ring me and play tricks on me all the time. I said, I don't want anything you got. Goodbye. I put the phone down. He rings back. He says, could you not hang up on me? I've got to ask you something. I said, what? He said, did you buy a soccer pools ticket recently? I said, yes, I did. He said, did you happen to buy 2 of them? I said, no, I only bought 1. He said, are you sure? He said, somehow someone we think could be you has won the first division plus all these other divisions because you bought a system ticket. I said, how much have I won? He said, we don't know because we can't find the other person. I said, is it $10,000? He said, it's probably a lot more than that. I said, look, forget about it. I said, give it to the Children's Hospital, put the phone down. A minute later, the phone rings again. This time it's Don Lane, the American guy who used to be on TV, right? And he comes on the phone and says, hi there, it's Don Lane here. He said, you Harry Marget? Yes. He said, listen, I don't want you to hang up on me, but we think you might be the Division 1 winner of both first division prizes in the soccer pools. I said, right, how much is that? He says, well, if we've got our calculations correct, probably about $1.34 million. This is 1982, David, right? Okay. I said, right. I said, could you excuse me? I said, I'm working on a patient. I put the phone down. I won first division, David, twice in the one draw. And you know why? Manifestly believing that I could do it. You know how we've been talking a lot here about business and dentistry and how you do and how you achieve. It just, for me, David, it was a thing that I just said, you know what? I really believe I can do this. I must say to myself, I can do it and I will do it. And that's what happened.
Well
And
done.
You have also along the line at the time of our friendship with your beautiful wife, Jane, who we love and adore, you've also committed yourself to so many things like exactly what you're doing now, your book, or your teaching, etc. And that's the same thing. You believe in your prospects and you believe in what you're doing. And that's why you're so successful.
Well, Harry, you're a smarter man than me. It's like trying to pick the trifecta winner in the Melbourne Cup.
I did that in 1989.
Did you?
I went to the track that day, and that was the year they had all the English stayers come over. A lot of English racehorses come over at big odds, 24-7 and 50-1 and 100-1, etc. And if you recall, all 3 English horses came in first, second, and third. So I took out what was called a multiple trifecta ticket. Like it was like you took 3, but then you took multiples of that, right? So the ticket itself is $3, but I spent, I think, about $130 on multiple variations of it. So I had it this way and then that way and then this way and that way, and hit it, So the whole thing cost me, I think, $30 or $40, etc. And guess what we picked up?
30 or 40,000. 30 or 40,000.
You're right, $34,000.
Well done, Harry. Well done.
Yeah. Look. The only reason I'm sharing that with you is that I think for you and all your viewers who are thinking about things laterally, I mean, you and I have the privilege of having the experience and having the years on our side to know that a lot of the stuff that happens, we can manifestly make it happen if we believe more in what we're doing than not believing in the fact that it may not be successful. So the thing that I've learned in my whole life, and especially in dentistry and in business, is that, manifestly believing in something enough changes your the way you do things, the way you go about your business or the way you go about believing in the processes. If you have that as your focus, right, then you change the way you do things quietly within yourself to make these things happen. If you wake up in the morning and you say to yourself, this is never going to work. I'm a negative person, etc. I mean, look, you get up every day, David, with all your injuries, so how you do it, I don't know, and you walk 10 kilometres every day of your life. And you do it, you know why? Because you say to yourself, I can do this. And you do, okay? How many people do you know with all the injuries you've got can do 10-kilometre walks every day?
I know.
No one.
They're not committed, Harry.
Yeah.
Harry, we touched on it
That's it.
briefly. In your later years, you've become a successful winemaker. Tell us about that journey.
Oh, thank you very much. That's a good journey. When I was 13, I took a job working for Seaview Winery in McLaren Vale. I used to ride my bike from my house to McLaren Vale, and I had a job sweeping the floor at Seaview, right, at 13. And my lucky day came when none other than Mr. Hardy himself, all 6'4" of him, comes down the stairs and says to this guy, the foreman, he said, "Who's that kid there?" He said, "Oh, it's just some local kid." He said he wanted to learn winemaking. I said, "What's he doing?" He said, "What's he doing sweeping the floor?" He said, "Well, I don't know what to give him to do." He said, get that broom off him." He said, "Put him in the wine room, get him to work." Right. So that's when it started. I was taken from the floor of sweeping dust up to the wine room and given a white coat, which is 50 sizes too big for me. But anyway, I was in the wine room. What happened then was an interesting story. I worked for them and learned the process of, crushing, blending, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then some years later, when I was working at the Hotel Australia, who comes in for dinner? None other than Mr. Grange himself. And the sommelier says to me, "Do you speak any German?" He said, "I heard you speaking some foreign language." I said, "That was Czechoslovakian." He said, "Do you speak German?" I said, "I do." He said, "Well, go and speak to him. He wants to ask something." So I went over there. I said, "Gutes hast du, have you got a good one?" I said, "We actually have something called Grange. Have you heard of it?" No, he says, "Yes, I might have heard of it, yeah." I said, "I'm going to go and get you one from the cellar." So I went down there and I got one, and the sommelier's looking at me. He said, "Do you know what you're doing?" He said, "You know how much that is worth?" I said, "He wants it." So I went back, opened it up, and gave it to him. Short story long, I suddenly got transferred from that job to Penfolds in McGill, working in the wine room there. Finished dentistry, got offered a cadetship as a winemaker, which my father wouldn't let me take. And I thought, well, that's the end of it. I had to put all this work into learning to make wine and to do it. And I'm going, no. So carry yourself forward to some years ago up here, and my wife, Vivian, who you've met, who used to live in Cape Schanck, we're driving around. We've been to see Philip Murphy, son of the late great Dan Murphy, who lived up there in Red Hill. And I've been working with him, cleaning out the tanks, David, and the pipes. I seem to be a good cleaner, although I don't think my wife believes that. Anyway, I was given that job, and we found a place down the road. I think you've been there. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you've been there with Jane. And they said, "Oh, you'll never get a vineyard in here, right? Never. It'll never work." There are those words again. It'll never work. So, short story long, we had so many disasters. We lost the canes, we had fires, we had tractor rollovers, we had droughts, we had all that sort of stuff. But finally, we grew some Pinot Noir. And the last 5 years, we have been making some absolutely delicious Pinot Noir, which is now being sold for $98 a bottle at the RACV Club in Cape Schanck. There are 3 restaurants around here that have got it now, 3 Italian restaurants. Mumu's restaurant in Queensland, the steak place, they've got it there for $105 a bottle. So we're making that and a rosé, which is they're selling for $92 a bottle at Cape Schanck. So yeah, then when I started that, I had to go and do an oenology course at Wagga Wagga, which is a beautiful big winemaking school over there. So there was a 2-year course involved in that. I didn't enjoy that at all because I'm not very good at mathematics, and you have to calculate sulfur levels and sulfur dioxide levels and beakers, and I didn't mind the chemistry. I just hated the mathematics. Yeah, so that was something, again, I just believed in passionately. I just really, really wanted to be someone who made wine, because everybody said you'll never do it, right? It'll never work. Same with the bees. Everybody said, "Oh, you don't know a thing about bees." Turned out I didn't know anything about bees, but I just passionately believed long enough that, and you can do anything with enough passion, David, as you know. Okay.
Well, I think that's a good way to sum things up, Harry. We did mention that some people have a gift and they put it to use. Some people have a gift and they don't use it. But I tell my clients this. I've yet to know of a baby that is born speaking any language. So learning how to speak is something that everybody has to do. Similarly, I've never seen a baby born holding a telephone in its hand. I've never seen a baby born holding a handpiece, a dental handpiece in its hand. So these are skills that
Right.
people learn to do. And so if we can learn to speak and learn to speak on a telephone, a good friend of mine used to say, what can happen when you speak on a telephone? Nobody's going to jump through the phone and stab you or shoot you. They're in another part of the country. So you can talk to somebody on the phone as strongly or as persuasively as you want. And you can also learn how to hold a handpiece and drill teeth as quickly or as slowly as you should as well. And so you've talked about this passion that you had as a child, which you kept inside you. And we've all had those fork in the road moments where we've been expected to do something academic as a career, whereas we had a passion for something creative. Congratulations to you, Harry, on going back to that childhood passion of learning how to make a master wine. And I've been to your place, yes. You have to be a mountain goat to go down that hill. I've looked at it from the top and I thought, oh, I'm not going down there because there's no
Not
back from the bottom. When you get the chairlift in, then maybe I'll do it. There's no chairlift there.
I hear you. No, it's a bit like some parts of Perugia in Italy. You go there and you look up and you see these rocky outcrops with vine grapes hanging off the side of them. I think, how the hell do they pick the grapes? There's just this vine hanging over the edge. No, look, it is an experience, and it is hard coming up that hill. I tell you, I mean, certainly now with my age and my infirmity with my heart condition, etc., it's certainly much harder. But you know what? That's what we have tractors for, David.
Well, I'd be worried the tractor's going to turn over, Harry. To me, a tractor's not designed to do anything.
Four-wheel
drive on the flat. Yeah, that's got 2 little wheels and 2 big wheels. I've seen those automatic lawnmowers tip up.
Yeah, well, I bought a Gator. So I've got 4 flat wheels and 4-wheel drive and all engaged brakes. As soon as you get onto a bit of a slope, the whole thing just kicks in. So it's great. Now I hear you though. It's not easy, but look, it's fun. We go down there and occasionally we walk down to the bottom of the hill and think to ourselves, oh, why have I done that? Now I've got to find my way back up there again. But I'll put in a chairlift, David, so you and I can both go up and down in our old age.
That'll be great. Harry, it's been great talking to you, and it's been great visiting on your journey through dentistry. And still, I wish you more success with your life after dentistry. And thank you for sharing your story to my viewers and my listeners on the Ultimate Dental Podcast. It's been a real pleasure having you on, Harry.
Thank you, David. It's been a real pleasure to be here. I love talking with you and your lovely wife, Jane. And I love seeing you more at our place, having a glass of wine and enjoying that. So I'm sure we'll do lots of that in the future. Thanks for the opportunity of sharing all this with me, and thank you for the invitation.
Thanks, Harry.
Thank you for tuning in to another inspiring episode of the Ultimate Dental Podcast. We appreciate each and every one of you for being part of our dental community and joining us each week on this incredible journey. If you found value in today's episode and you don't want to miss out on future episodes packed with expert insights and actionable strategies, here's how you can stay connected with us. Firstly, hit that subscribe button. Whether you're listening on your favourite podcast platform or watching on our website, subscribing ensures you'll never miss an episode. Secondly, share the love. If you know a fellow dentist or colleague who could benefit from the wisdom and knowledge that we share here, please share our podcast with them. Also, please share the podcast on your socials by simply clicking on the social icons wherever you view or listen to this podcast. Together, we can all do our bit to elevate the dental profession. And finally, stay engaged with us. We love hearing from you. Your questions, comments, and feedback fuel our mission to provide the best content for your professional growth, your personal growth, and for your practice growth. Remember, your journey to creating a dental practice and a business life that you love is our mission, and we're excited to be your trusted guide along the way. Thank you for being a part of the Ultimate